Welcome everybody to Atheist Analysis. Hopefully you guys can hear me. I think you can. So tonight we are going to have a debate show. Welcome.
It is a dehumanizing, sadistic religion that this Christianity is. It turns me cold.
Back again?
To the young, I would whisper that the Bible is a myth. I would convince them that man created God instead of the other way around.
Whatever we once were, we are no longer a Christian nation, at least not just.
A good interview should be like a conversation that you don't care when they know you're eavesdropping.
But on the atheist side of things, on a personal belief, like on my personal convictions, I don't believe there's a God. I openly say there is no God.
That's me. But to take it a step further, I do this because someone did it for me. I appreciated it greatly. I don't want others to have to go through what I did. And if they do, I will be there to support them.
Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way.
Hey guys, welcome to Atheist Analysis.
Hey everybody. Welcome to Atheist Analysis. Thank you guys so much for joining us in all of our crazy intro. Very sorry for that. This is the first time I am running all the audio, video, everything. It's crazy. So, just wanted to make sure you guys are all here. Tonight, we're going to have an awesome debate. We're going to be debating, not me, but we are going to have a debate between Max Mills, David Fitzgerald, on the historicity of Jesus. So you guys can't pass that up, right? That sounds like an awesome show. So tonight what we're going to do is we're going to have Johnny take a break. He's got plenty of things to do with an upcoming project, and we don't want to take too much of his time. So we are going to run it ourselves. So without too much further ado, let's bring in the guests. Let's see if I can actually bring them up on the screen. Hey guys, are you there?
We're here. I am here.
Hey, welcome to the show, everybody. So
Great to be here.
what we'll do is we'll do like a quick intro. How about that, between all of you guys? Max, if you want to go ahead and start, since you're the resident Christian, and then we'll get into David Fitzgerald.
My name is Max Mills. I am a Christian, and I've done this before. I actually ran a debate show on Atheist Analysis for some time. And I think Jesus existed. So, yeah, that's it.
There you go.
All right, and Mr. Fitzgerald, are you there?
I am here. I'm Dave Fitzgerald. I'm the author of a book, Nailed 10 Christian Myths That Show Jesus Never Existed at All.
Are you sure he didn't exist?
Pretty sure.
All right. So guys, tonight, what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and have like a moderated debate. So you probably won't see a lot of me. You're going to see a lot more of Max and them. I'm going to try and stay out of it as much as I can. That way the two of them can argue with each other. And so what I would like to do kind of as an opening premise for everybody is I'd like to go ahead and have David start with like just some sort of an opening talk about, you know, his thoughts, his feelings on the historicity of Jesus. And then we'll kind of just go back and forth from there, and we'll try and let it play out as naturally as possible.
Gotcha. Well, actually, the tech setup was so involved and took so long that now me and Max have been talking. We like each other so much, we don't even want to debate Jesus. We just want to compare classic Star Trek episodes.
Yeah, we actually agree that Jesus both did and did not exist.
It's Schrodinger's Jesus. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Well, no, seriously. I have done the debate a lot, and I've done historicity debates a lot. And this is probably a bad time to bring this confession, but I hate debates. I hate them so much, especially debating Christians on this issue, because just for starters, I mean, we're going to be talking past each other. There's not going to be any core of agreement at all. It'll be, you know, Dave says blah, blah, blah. Max says, no, it doesn't. Max says, no, Dave says, blah, blah, blah. But that said, let's jump into it and see what I would really optimally love to do is just sort of explain why a normal, rational, skeptic person like me believes something that most people think is so crazy wackadoodle out there as the historicity of Jesus being put in question. So I kind of want to start and see how I got to this point. 15 years ago, it never even entered my mind that there might have been no Jesus. I mean, I was an atheist. I've been an atheist for 16 years, perfectly happy and content. And if I had come up to myself back then and said what I'm going to be telling you tonight, or what I've written in my book, I wouldn't have believed it. I would have thought that was crazy talk. It wasn't until I got curious to know what Jesus really did and really said, and how much we can trust what's in our sources for him. That's when I started getting into trouble, and that's what turned me from being an atheist Jesus historist into a Jesus mythicist, and happily so. So I think that's enough of an introduction to get started.
Okay. I mean, I have a bunch of questions for you, obviously, and it's great that you want to discuss this, because that's also what I want out of this, is to try and understand kind of where you're coming from. You say that a lot of the thing that turned you towards your current belief on the non-existence of Jesus Christ revolves around what you felt was a lack of reliability among some aspects of his life. And I feel like when I was, skimming your book for a short amount of time, there was a lot of
speculation.
There's no reason that Jesus didn't turn water into wine, which is not, I believe that he did, but that's not what the debate is about. Yeah. Therefore, Jesus didn't exist, sort of thing. And that seems like a strange dichotomy. Like, the example that came to mind is we both would agree that Julius Caesar existed, but we would both disagree that he was a Roman deity. And yet, that is the legend, And so I feel like I'm curious as to hearing your reasons for rejecting all of Jesus rather than just the mythological chunks that you would already rejected as an atheist.
Right, and that's a great question, because that's the most common default setting, I think, for most atheists, is that, of course he wasn't a deity, but there really was a guy. And for me, the question on that hinges on, well, what is our sources for Jesus? And Robert Price, for me, put it best when he said that for all extents and purposes, everything that we know about the guy Jesus hinges on sources that had nothing to do with anyone who actually lived in the first century. So that the way he puts it is, even if there had been a Jesus in the first century, for all extents and purposes, there isn't one anymore, because everything we know about that guy comes from sources that are completely removed from him. That's a very simplistic way of putting it. What I would say even further than that is when you look at our sources for Jesus, they kind of fall into two camps. You've got what are the primary sources, which are the Gospels, and you've got the what do you want to say, extra canonical historical evidence from him that's outside of Christianity. And both of those have been really inflated, in my opinion, and in others' opinion, within Christian circles. The reliability of them, the sources of them, their trustworthiness, and their very genre has been misrepresented, in my humble opinion.
Okay. So I noticed that you said that all these things are very far removed, and obviously the first thing that came to my mind was Paul, who wrote as much as 2 decades after Christ and who claimed to have known Jesus' brother, James. In Galatians 1, I think he makes that comparison. Right. So my question for you is, Paul also claimed to know, friends and family of Jesus, not just the brother, but we're also talking, he claimed to know Peter, he claimed to know these people who claimed to be Jesus's friends. And he was a first-hand, first-century witness to those things. And so I'm wondering why you don't put as much weight on Paul.
Well, actually, Paul I put a lot of weight on because he is our earliest surviving Christian writing, the genuine writings of Paul. I'm getting a weird echo. Are you guys getting that as well?
I don't know. It might be my little brother playing Morrowind, which is the best Elder Scrolls, by the way.
Let me see if I can keep going. And, the difference between Paul, and not just Paul, but everybody in his generation of Christianity, the way they talk about Jesus and the leaders of the Jerusalem church is so different from the way we get in the Gospels. I agree with you that the verse in Galatians where he says, I met no one except James, the brother of the Lord, that's the closest we get to any kind of direct reference to Jesus. And then just a couple verses later in that exact same book, he's talking about James, Peter, John, as though they're not real Christians, and he opposes them throughout Galatians. In fact, he never calls them disciples. He never uses the word disciples. They don't claim to be disciples because we don't have any writings from them. All we have are writings that were forged by later Christians towards the very end of the 1st century or the beginning and middle of the 2nd century.
Okay. Now you said later in Galatians. And I read some parts.
And just a few verses later.
I read the that were me. And you referenced as evidence for that. I assume this is what you're talking about. Galatians chapter 2 verses 2 through 6. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Is it okay if I read that so the audience knows what we're talking
Absolutely.
about? Okay. I went in response. This is the NIV. If you want me to change it to something more reliable.
I do hate the NIV, but keep
I'll
going.
change it to the ESV.
How about do you have the NRSV? NRSV is.
I have literally everything. This is.
NIV is one of the most dishonest translations.
I'm also not a huge fan, but I did like it when I was a youngster. In any case, I went up in response to a revelation. Then I laid before them, though only in private meetings with the acknowledged leaders, the gospel that I had proclaimed among the Gentiles in order to make sure that I was not running or had not run in vain. But even Titus, who was with me, was not compelled to be circumcised, though he was a Greek. But because of false believers secretly brought in, who slipped in to spy on the freedom we have in Christ Jesus, so that they may enslave us, we did not submit to them even for a moment, so that the truth of the gospel might always remain with you. And from those who were supposed to be acknowledged leaders, here you say, this is James, Peter, and I think that's justified.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What they actually were makes no difference to me, for God shows no partiality. Those leaders contributed nothing to me. And you say this is a strong condemnation of them, and that Paul never went on to say that they were great. So,
and what's more than that, not only does he continue to oppose them, but he never, ever refers to them as being disciples of the Lord. He never refers to any of them in that list in 1 Corinthians of so-called witnesses. They're not witnesses to a living Jesus. They're all he claims that they're all witnesses of the risen Jesus. And none of his that laundry list he gives matches anything we have in our Gospels.
I'm going to read the next few verses after that because I think they're really important.
Okay.
It said, the leaders contributed nothing to me. On the contrary, when they saw that I had been entrusted with the gospel for the uncircumcised, that is, the Greeks, just as Peter had been entrusted with the gospel for the circumcised. For he who worked through Peter, making him an apostle to the circumcised, also worked through me in sending me to the Gentiles. Here he's saying that he's comparing his ministry to the Greeks with Peter's ministry to the Jews. And he even goes on to say that the same person who made Paul an apostle to the Greeks made Peter an apostle to the circumcised, that is, the Jews.
And I agree. And who is that?
Are you Peter?
No. But you're saying, who is that person that worked through them?
I think that Paul is arguing that it was God. Do you disagree?
Well, actually, I thought he was arguing Jesus myself.
Well, it's Jesus and God. Well, I mean, I'm a Christian, so I think Jesus was God. So
but what's interesting about that is he's not saying, after all, I knew Jesus, and he's not saying Peter knew Jesus. He's saying they have the exact same footing. He doesn't have to defend himself saying, well, I know he was, traveled around with Jesus and all, and it was a disciple and all that. He never says anything remotely like that at all.
Well, I think two things. First, the first thing I really want to hammer in on is that this and the verses after make it clear that the statement that there was this big division where they were pulling apart and where Paul didn't think that Peter and them were from God, this is disproven by these
not at all. I disagree completely.
So you think that when he says that Jesus and God were working through Peter and that Peter had a mission by God entrusted with the Jews that was similar to Paul's being entrusted with the Gentiles, you don't think that was, you think that what he was actually was saying?
I mean, he's granting that, but the sandwiches, the verses sandwiching that, how does he say these guys are not, these are bringing in false believers? How does he say, I don't know who these guys are, but whoever they are, it's nothing to me? It's like, how do you talk about that if you think this is Jesus's friends and family?
That is such a great point. Here's my response to that. The first is, it doesn't actually say who the false believers are or where they were brought in from. Those are considered separately from the leaders. It says the leaders, and then it talks about false people who were there among the general, leadership-ish. But then it goes back to the acknowledged leaders, which we're talking the big three in your book. And I think that
those are the same leaders. Oh, sorry. I just want to point out, those are the same leaders he's opposing in the next chapter as well.
Well, yeah, but let's get there in a minute. Yeah. But it says, what they are actually makes no difference to me. God shows no partiality. So his point, and this also explains why he didn't talk about him talking with Jesus, is that God has no favoritism. Like, it doesn't matter who they were. That was exactly what he said. He didn't say they were bad. He said that it didn't matter what they said because he had a mission from God. He did say there were bad people in the church, but he doesn't.
Well, he said they were false believers. That's the other thing.
He didn't say. Yeah, he said there were false believers.
No, I take your point. But here's the context of all this thing he's saying. Yeah. We never get anything from him. This is the closest we get to him actually giving a concrete description of who this Jerusalem church is, who their leadership is. And is this point, and in all the other points of not just his writing, but all the writings of first generation Christians, pre-gospel Christians, we never get just the simplest acknowledgement that Jesus hung out with these guys, that they followed him personally. All the things we get from the gospel is completely absent in everything we get before the gospels are written.
Well, I don't know if that's, entirely true. I don't know if I'd say everything because I'm about to talk about the crucifixion. But I definitely agree that he didn't give as much attention to them as you or I, with our 21st century hats on, might expect. But I also think that it's clear here that he believed Peter and these other guys were from God, and he says that they approved of me, I approved of them, and we're working together. Like, he viewed them as one church. He thought that the Jerusalem church had people in it who were bad, but he also thought that these people we think of as the church leadership were good people.
Here's my point about that, and I agree with what you're saying. Here's my point about that. What he's also saying about that is that they were on the equal footing. He didn't have any special advantage of. He didn't have to defend the fact that he wasn't a disciple of Jesus. He never raises that as an issue, even to defend himself when he's disagreeing with them.
Of course not, because God does not show favoritism. That's his point. That's what the Bible says.
Yeah, but seriously, let's think about that realistically for a minute. Yeah. Do you think that if he hadn't been a disciple and yet he's disagreeing with the apostles, what he calls an apostle isn't a disciple, it's everybody who's a Christian. But do you think he really could have gotten away with never ever having to defend his own position against that?
Well, I think
because we never see him
he
doing
does
that.
spend quite a bit of time arguing against his position in his letters, arguing for his position. I think that this sentence that God does not show partiality, it's part of him making his case. And I think over and over again, when he describes his experience, he intentionally slips in references equating it to the experience of those others.
Well, hang on a second, because wait a second. Let me ask you this: when does he describe his experience? Because I never see a thing where he himself is describing the version that Luke gives us in Acts.
He simply says that it was revealed to him, but he doesn't actually describe it.
Well, he says more than that. He says it was by revelation and through Scripture. And everything he seems to know about Jesus, like the fact that he was crucified, died, and rose on the third day, is constantly by this refrain we hear from him all the time, according to the Scriptures. According to the Scriptures. We know this according to the Scriptures. And when he's in the synagogue arguing with the Jews, how is he doing it? He's ruling it out and saying, this is what Jesus did according to the Scriptures and through the Scriptures.
Of course. I mean, he's not going
over and over and over again. We get that.
The middle of the temple and say, well, my boy Peter over there was telling me a good story about
But that's exactly how he does it in Acts. That's the thing that drives me crazy. In Luke, when he's writing the supposed history of the church, that's exactly how they talk. They all start with the history and Jesus being on earth and doing all these things. When we get before the Gospels are written, before those stories are written, we don't see that at all. Instead, we see that he's complaining about other preachers who are preaching other Jesuses, other Christ, other Gospels.
It seems to me that whether or not and what discrepancies exist between Acts and Paul's epistles and what ways of introducing and describing things occur between the author of Acts and epistles is mildly irrelevant to the topic of whether or not Jesus existed and how Paul viewed himself in relation to the church. I think that if Paul spent too much time harping on the discipleship of these other people, it would lessen his own position, and I think that would be a bad political move, and I think that's a good enough explanation, in my opinion.
Gotcha. Well, here's the other thing to say about that.
To your point, Paul does rebuke Peter.
Yeah. Oh. And let's just.
Oh, no, sorry, you lagged.
So
I didn't realize I was wrong.
Max, wait a
Sorry, we had a lag.
No, he was lagging, so I didn't realize he was talking. And then suddenly he talked really fast, and I was like,
oh dear.
Anyway,
Chipmunk,
yeah. Welcome to the 21st century, high tech. Yeah. Here, let me go one quick point, and then we can move on to another thing, because you're talking about the crucifixion, and you didn't talk about the Last Supper, but those are two things I'd like to move on to at one point.
Okay.
But the thing is, Acts, I think it is important to point out that there are major discrepancies just in the chronology, the theology, everything about that. We compare what's written about Paul in Acts and what's written about Paul in his genuine letters is at odds, at complete odds, and there's a reason for that. And it goes back to how we can trust the sources that we have for Jesus. That's the only point I want to make about that.
So I read would you consider Sean Hannity to be a good source for Barack Obama?
I don't consider him a good source for his own ass, let alone anything.
Okay. And yet, if he's talking about Obama or his rear end, no matter what he says about them, the fact that he's talking about them is evidence that he exists, right? Bias is not all by itself reason to dismiss.
I grant you that, and other reasons would give me confidence that saying Barack Obama would exist. Are you saying that's the same analogy with Jesus? Because I'm not seeing that.
No. We obviously have way more evidence for Barack Obama. I'm just saying, it seems like you're saying, like, well, maybe these sources aren't reliable, maybe blah, 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 and maybe that's all true, but that doesn't
I'm not saying maybe. I'm saying definitely they are, and I will argue that in the book, but I'm just saying that's an important point to make. That's not we shouldn't move over that lightly, is what I'm saying.
Okay. I feel like I understand why you want to move over that lightly, but I just want to. Oh man, what was I going to say? It was good.
I know. I feel your pain. I've been there.
It would have got you.
This is why I hate debates. I hate debates is because we're both chomping at the bit to get the gotcha question in, and I don't know, and see. It's right. I'll tell you what.
But I guess I feel like.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
I was going to say, let's move on to another one.
I was going to say,
maybe it'll come back to you, and then we can jump back to it.
Sounds good. You say what you're going to say, and then we'll jump back to this.
Okay. Well, I want to talk about two things, because there's really only two things in Paul's writing that seem to make an appearance in the gospel, and that's the fact that Jesus was crucified and the fact that he had a Lord's Supper. Those are kind of the two things I focus on in the book.
Okay.
Here's what I had to say about this. if you will.
Also, that he had a brother. That's the third thing.
Well, see, the brother of the Lord is not the same as saying Jesus is brother. And I grant you, well, it's simple. It's a simple fact. He calls everybody. He calls all Christians a brother. He calls other missionary units the brother of the Lord. There's the 500 brethren. The 500 brethren in 1 Corinthians 15.
Absolutely. But here specifically, he uses brother to set aside James from the other Christians he's listing. Like, he doesn't say, this guy the brother, this guy the brother. He lists a bunch of people who are all Christians. He said, and James, the brother of Jesus, James.
No, he doesn't say brother of Jesus, and that's important too. He says the brother of the Lord, not the brother of Jesus.
Moves the context.
And anytime, hold on, I'm getting some lag. I should pause. But anytime he's talking or alluding to Jesus, it's always in this vague manner, this roundabout way. We don't get concrete things from him that are tied to Jesus. And that's the closest we get. And that's why it keeps coming up in debates. But that's the closest we get. Everything else, and that's still pretty vague and nebulous. It's like the seed of Abraham or made of a woman, born of a woman. He doesn't talk about Jesus the way we would talk about somebody who actually existed in Bethlehem. And it's not just Paul. That's the other thing that drives me crazy. It's all the generations of Christians writings that survived before the Gospels. They all have this weird nebulous thing. And it's Christian theologians who talk about this as much as atheists do. The silence of Paul they talk about.
Yeah, sure. I agree. I think that's weird. I think it's strange. I think an argument from silence isn't by itself very powerful. But I also think at the end of the day, you have guys like Pontius Pilate who weren't mentioned for 40 years except for a passing reference in Philo. And then we're also occasionally, a little bit referenced in Josephus 40 years later. And we have all these people from this time period. Like, the historians weren't very interested in this time period. The people who were writing about this were the early Christians. And I think the fact that, given that, for the time period during his lifetime, like, if Christianity is true, the big deal happened when he resurrected. Before that, he was one of hundreds and hundreds of rabbis, hundreds and hundreds of people claiming to be the Messiah. He lived, he died, some backwater Jewish hippie. There's no particular reason to believe he would be getting more attention than Pontius Pilate. And yet, by the way, there are way more references to him than Pontius Pilate.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. Because, first of all, you're not quite right. It's not unusual for famous military people and famous politicians to be super famous in their lifetime and then forgotten. It's the same today as it was then. The fact is, we do have evidence for Pontius Pilate. We probably don't. And if you count outside his fringe cult, outside Christianity itself, we have nothing for Jesus until into the 2nd century. Nothing at all.
I think.
And I'm counting Josephus when I say that.
But Josephus is also, one of the first big references for Pontius Pilate. Like, aside from Josephus and Philo, I'm wondering who else you're talking about that gave us a really
we actually have concrete inscriptions that mention Pontius Pilate.
Oh yeah, inscriptions.
And in fact, that's another question. How do we know about the historicity of anybody? Because John the Baptist, he might have been mythological too. I don't think he was for a couple of reasons, but it wouldn't stun me either if it turned out he wasn't.
History is more nebulous than science. It's not chemistry.
But here's in the case of Jesus, here's one of the things that raised a red flag for me is we do have information for other loser wannabe messiahs from that same period, from that same time, in that same region, more than a dozen of them. And yet all those losers are so much less interesting than even a stripped down, purely human Jesus would have been if the Gospels are true at all. And another the problem I have when I'm debating this is a lot of time I'm thinking of this is fake mythological Jesus versus merely human Jesus. And because I'm usually doing that against atheists who are trying to give me, that argument. But if you're talking about a Jesus who raised all the saints in Jerusalem cemetery from the dead, and they all walked out of Jerusalem cemetery and appeared to many, if there's supernatural, not an eclipse, but supernatural darkness that covered the whole region for 3 hours, if you have earthquakes, any number of miracles and fabulous happenings as we see in the Gospels, and we're meant to believe that those really happened, well, it's crazy to think that we have instead accounts of this loser Messiah who got his followers killed, and this guy who went to the Mount of Olives and got himself slaughtered, and John the Baptist did this, and that's all we hear from him.
Well,
but all those guys did all these much less interesting things, and they make a footstep, a mark in the historical record, and Jesus does. Not for over 100 years.
Hey, Max?
Yeah.
Right before you get into that point, before you go too far, what we want to do is we want to take a quick commercial break. And when we come back, I'll tell you what, you get the first word. So.
Go!
Okay.
All right. So thank you guys for sticking around. If you just started joining us, this is David Fitzgerald versus Max Mills in a light gloves debate about the historicity of Jesus. So we're going to take a quick commercial break, guys. And when we come back, we're going to have more from Max and David. Be right back.
As Atheist Analysis grows, we look to partner with an organization that will support what we do within the movement. We have chosen to partner with Be Secular, not just because they give back to their affiliates, but because of their mission. When you head to besecular.com and select Atheist Analysis as your affiliate and purchase anything from their store, they donate up to 50% of the profit to that affiliate. That affiliate, of course, would be us. This is a great opportunity to purchase products at excellent prices and elegant fashion styles while helping support a great cause. Support Be Secular as they help support Atheist Analysis and all of our future endeavors.
So, you've probably caught the Atheist Analysis web show, right? Or even listened on an audio podcast. We bring people together, and we make them think. And if you've ever wondered where you can find more, well, you're not alone. We took the best minds for science and psychology, humanism, and paired them up with our all-star blog editor, Chris Hanna. Some people call him a grammar Nazi. We took these thoughts, these ideas, and experiences and put them together into a single place. It's the Atheist Analysis blog. And you can check it out live, online, anytime you like. Pretty cool stuff. So check it out. And when you go online, make sure you get involved. I mean, drop us a comment. Let us know what you like and what you don't like, and we'll do our best to change it. And if there's something that you really like, well, you might as well just share it with your friends. The Atheist Analysis blog. Check it out on atheistanalysis.com/blog.
Ooh, I like that. So, tell us something about yourself that you've never told any other show.
I once did an interview with the New York Times naked.
Naked?
It was a phone interview, but yeah, I was at home and I took off all my clothes just so I could say that I had been interviewed by the New York Times naked. I don't think I've ever said that publicly.
That's awesome. I've actually done a couple Atheist Analysis shows naked from down here, but that's why we got the desk, you know.
Go on.
Oh man, my PR director is about to kill me right now.
Hey, and welcome back, everybody, to our awesome, light-gloved debate show. Back in the day, Max would call this the debate show without an interesting name, but he's kind of graduated from college, looking for a new job, trying to find a place to settle in, and so Max is kind of super, super busy right now, and he was very gracious enough to take his time out to have this discussion with David. So if you're watching this right now and you just joined us, we are in the middle of a live debate between David and Max. Johnny's absent tonight. He's got a lot of projects he's working on. I'm here moderating, but I'm not the obvious person you want to see. We want to bring David and Max back. So, David and Max, are you guys there?
We're here. We're here.
Welcome back, guys.
I have myself muted.
Well, that's okay. See, we don't always want to hear you, Max. We only want to hear you when you're trying to spew intellectual stuff. Yeah,
God, that's harsh.
Yeah. So as we come back, we were right in the middle of a discussion, and we were talking about Paul. And you know what? I cut Max off just so we could plug our sponsors. So I owe Max a favor. Max,
this is no worries. This is what Fox is always telling me. You guys are at war with us.
It's persecution, is what it is.
Daily oppression.
So Max, I'm gonna go ahead and let you jump right into it. And
I actually wrote down what I was going to say so I wouldn't forget it. So if this feels a little robotic and Reed-ish, my bad.
Hey, Max, when are you not a robot?
Huh? I am Chris. Telling you.
All right, I'll let it go. Go ahead, Max.
All right. So you mentioned a bunch of stuff about Christian doctrine, and I have enjoyed our talk, and I would love to debate, Christianity and theology as a whole. But the point that I was making is that, just for a historical Jesus, just for Jesus himself, the argument from silence is very, weak. If a historical Jesus existed as a man, he would have had, fewer written records and obviously no inscriptions when compared to Pontius Pilate. And yet Pilate only had 2 written records, inscriptions aside, because there's no reason for Jesus to have had any such things at all because he wasn't a governor. Yet Pilate only had 2 written records. Jesus has better records in the form of Paul. And while they do not clarify exactly what happened with Jesus, both Paul and the early non-canonical document, the Gospel of Thomas, depict Jesus as a living, breathing human being. And both in the same ways. Paul by saying that James was his brother, and Thomas by saying that Judas was his brother. And I guess I just feel like there was a question I wanted to ask you. And this is going to deviate us off course a little bit, but where do you think Christianity came from if you don't think it came from Jesus? Like, what's your theory?
That is a wonderful question I'm addressing in my new book right now as we speak, I'm working on now. And this is the answer, the short version of the answer, is I think Christianity began as a Jewish version of the Hellenistic mystery faith that we see all over the first century. That's the very, very short answer of that. I think it was if you described to your average first century mystery faith person how their religion works and said, okay, what would a Jewish version of this look like? Boom, you've got Christianity.
Okay, well, obviously you can't lay out your whole new book here, so I'm gonna
stay tuned.
Yeah. However, that does mean you don't think that it was solely from the Romans, so I can close my written out.
Oh God! Oh, Joseph Atwill and his crazy ass.
Such a
the Romans
nut,
invented it all. And here's the thing about this: I'm glad that we can agree on this because if you're smart enough to concoct the story that Josephus and the Romans invented it as Jewish crowd control, you're smart enough to know it's a complete non-starter right from the get-go.
Dude, so what gets me is there was some guy who used to come on this show a really long time ago, like back during the early days, and he claimed that all the Gospels were and all the everything was written by the exact same guy, and that's just so bizarre.
But here's the thing: that is while that is crazy, I would argue, and I don't have to argue because other people are making the argument for me, that all 4 of our Gospels are ultimately based off of the first Gospel, Mark. And by that, I mean the synoptic problem shows that there's clear dependency from Matthew and Luke upon Mark.
I don't know about John, and also there's...
Not so much John.
Yeah. But speaking of John, in your book, you said that the reason, your counter-argument for... this idea that everything started with Jesus and the apostles was that there were so many different Christianities.
Yes.
And that's fine. However, it seems to me, obviously we've already discussed the fact that I feel that Galatians makes it clear that Paul considered Peter and all these other people to be part of the same church. He does rebuke Peter, but for hypocrisy, not for doctrine, later in the document.
Well, let me ask you, who do you think he's talking to when he's talking about the people preaching another Jesus and another gospel, another Christ?
Absolutely, there are people who are having false teachings who are seeping in at this point.
But he's not saying false teachings. I mean, he does say false teachings, but he says they're teaching other Christs. They're teaching other Jesuses.
But these are people who come into the churches. Like there's not 2 competing equally, big churches. What's happening is they're splintering, which happens with every movement.
But how do we know that? How do we know? That's always been the official party line.
Well,
but to me, it seems the other way around. It seems it starts, the earlier we go back, the more multifaceted Christianity is.
I couldn't disagree more, and let me tell you why. And my argument here is going to rest on the book of John. The book of John is, for lack of a better word, a cluster sex of rebuttals to different early Christianities. You've got him arguing against Docetism. You got him arguing against all these different things.
Right.
And if you compare that, if you look, he's the end, right? And then Paul, maybe he's the beginning. And if you look at this timeline of Christian writers, what you find is that the further you go down, the more different viewpoints they are responding to, which to me signals a splintering process, because Paul wasn't talking to the same people John is talking to. Paul was talking to one, maybe at best two different groups, mostly.
Hold on. Because you had me up to that point. In fact, I'm saying, wait, I think you're making my point for me.
No.
But well, keep going.
No. Now I'm too curious. So you must go.
Because when you say, you're talking about a splintering process, but we never see an original process, is what I'm saying. We don't see anything in the earliest Christian writings that say, this is the official story. We see nothing like that at all. We don't see a Jesus biography appearing until generations later.
Here's the issue. And this is a problem that Judaism had as well. I've never spoken to you, but if you watch some of my old things, you'll know that I do a lot of Old Testament stuff, a lot of rabbinic stuff. And when the temple fell in 70 AD, the Jews no longer had a place to teach at, just like when the first temple fell. By the way, the Torah was compiled after the first temple because they had to bring everything together because they no longer had a place to speak orally. The same thing happened with the second temple, obviously. The Jews produced their Talmuds and all these different things.
Et cetera, et cetera.
Obviously this Jewish splinter religion that is Christianity didn't write down a lot of its stuff. I think the absence of these things doesn't mean they weren't there. I think that when you look at even the release of Mark, it was about the time of the destruction of the temple, and everything else trailed after that. Yeah.
Clearly.
And so I think, so what I'm saying here is not that obviously, the lateness isn't evidence of it, but I think that there's a very good reason, aside from your belief that Jesus didn't exist, for the lateness of these documents.
Let me because you said something that made me prick up my ears, and of course I just forgot it now.
I hate that.
Don't you hate that though? Hang on. What were you just saying? You're saying John goes back. We're talking about the multiplicity of Christianity. Also in the first century, there was a multiplicity of Judaisms at the time. There was no one Orthodox Judaism at that time. But that wasn't the point I was going to make either. The point was...
Okay.
What's it?
Are you trying to say that they were splintered and brought together?
No, I know what it was. Here's the thing. When you were talking about the argument from silence, I get the argument of silence thrown at me a lot. And one of the things that bothers me about that is, yes, there's lots of different levels and different kinds of arguments of silence to be made, but by no means is that what we're resting on. Talking about mythicists, serious mythicists, not like Atwill. Just our sources alone. And when we're talking about our earliest sources, we're not talking about the Gospels, for starters. But when you go to the Gospels and you, I don't have to explain the synoptic problem to you, but do you agree that the synoptic problem shows that Matthew and Luke have a dependency, if not a complete copyright problem with Mark?
I mean,
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
there are some people who think that there were a few pre-existing documents that they drew from as well. I don't know how. Yeah. I'm
not a fan of the Q. I don't think Q exists. I think Q is where Matthew is being stolen from, as well as Mark from Luke.
This is not necessarily my area of expertise in terms of whether Q exists or not, but I accept that modern scholarship has reached that conclusion, and I think that it is a sensible conclusion, and I see it at work when I read those three Gospels.
I appreciate that. And for me, that's a very important point to make. The fact that all our Gospels ultimately stem from one guy writing after the destruction of the temple. That's a serious problem. But that's not the real problem. And this is what I discuss in the book at great length. I go through the entire book of Mark and show how almost every single passage of that is a pastiche, a midrash, if you will, of Old Testament. And not just Old Testament, but other extra-canonical Jewish writings, Greek writings, different sources, but primarily Old Testament writings like Zechariah, like Isaiah, like the Psalms, et cetera, et
Yeah.
cetera.
This is why I got into studying the Old Testament. I think people like to think of Jesus as even the gospel version of Jesus, or whatever. I think they think of him as this guy who came along and brought all this new stuff to light in terms of his teaching and stuff. But I think it's very, very clear that he was talking in an Old Testament Jewish context, and I think that when you look at it through that lens, it makes a lot more sense. So I agree.
I agree with you in a inverted sort of way. I say I think yes, you're right, but it's because it's deliberate. He's being created and fabricated to echo that.
Okay. Created by Mark?
Yes, created by Mark.
Okay. So what do you think? So do you believe that Mark came out of the quote unquote, to use Bart Ehrman's words, proto-Christian, proto-Orthodox movement that Paul was part of? So
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well,
so
actually, I take that back. He was in that same generation. Whether tracing out the family tree of whether he was part of that same community of Paul's, that's a whole thornier issue altogether.
So here's what I think, and I think that this fits pretty well with both of our things, is I think that the evidence pretty clearly suggests that there was a branching out, at least 20 years after, between Paul and John. And I also agree that there came a point where those branches obviously came together, in part because of the standardized religious texts.
Did you say? Did you mean Mark when you said John just now?
What did I say?
You said between Paul and John.
I think
just
from
20 years between Paul and John. I'm thinking it's a lot further than that for John. But
yeah, I think. Obviously, if the other churches did not still exist, John wouldn't still have been responding to them. In fact, they continued for a few centuries after that. In fact, what the Muslim book, which I was telling you about before, says that one of the reasons the Muslims were so successful in the Middle East was because they were, Docetists and all this different thing, and the core Orthodox Church considered them heretics and kind of didn't treat them very well, and it allowed the Muslims to easily woo the people. So the point there is that the splintering occurred for a really long time. And I feel like what you're saying is that the splintering happened and it was brought in. And what I'm saying is the splintering happened, but I agree that the standardization of religious texts brought it into check. I just think that your initial argument, if I understood it from the book, that there were all these different Christianities, so none of them could be true, is not how I view things. I think that Paul and Peter and all these guys had a church, and then there was some slight splintering that was a problem. And then as you move down the line, it becomes a bigger and bigger problem until they solve that problem with their proto-Orthodox Christian writings.
I'm pleased that we've reached this point because we are in agreement that that's how you see it, and I see it as a completely different thing. So yay for us. Well done. Well done. This is the way I like debates, is because we don't have to agree on everything, but at least we know where we're agreeing and disagreeing. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
So all Star Trek episodes. I think my favorite's got to be the one with the tribbles, but no. Oh,
well,
Chris is giving the shake. No, we can't do that. Okay, no. All right, more Jesus. Go ahead.
This is so pleasant.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do something.
You're gonna take a nap.
I think Josephus as a source is a little weak and unnecessary.
I do too. I think it's very problematic.
Yeah, I think for historicity, I think Paul is sufficient. I think we don't need much evidence to conclude that a man exists. I think there's not a lot of counter evidence. I think it's good enough.
That Paul exists? You're saying that Paul existed?
No, I think there's enough evidence without Josephus or I'm probably mispronouncing it, but whatever. Josephus.
I say Josephus, but I know what you mean.
Well, this is America, and if you can't speak American, but Josephus.
Yeah.
And so I usually don't bring him up because he's controversial and because.
Well, actually, Bart Ehrman makes a great point. Says even if every single word of the testimonium in Josephus was true, all he's saying is what anybody in the 90s would have said on the street. So
sure.
It really doesn't add anything to it. But
what I want to talk about is why you believe that the primary excerpt. There's obviously one main reference and two kind of tangential reference, one to Jesus and one to kind of John
James,
the Baptist.
the brother of Jesus, Oh, and John the Baptist,
the first one, John the Baptist doesn't really count. We can throw him out, because we agree that he existed. So the first one you say was not an edit, as most scholars tend to believe, but an actual total fabrication, and that Jesus was never
fabrication. I would like to. Well, for one reason. For 500 years of Christianity, there's only one guy who ever seems to know that thing existed at all, and that's Eusebius of Caesarea. But for 300 years before him, Josephus was second to the Bible. He was the second most well-read book among the Christian fathers, probably in everyone who's literate at the time. And they are constantly going to Josephus for things like acknowledgement that John the Baptist exists. But you get people like Origen saying, well, of course Jesus did all these wonderful, miraculous things, but what other source do we have them but the Bible? And it's like, well, wait a second. We've got your book that you inherited, Eusebius inherited from him, and it doesn't have it, Anyway.
Well, Josephus, or however Josephus, was a Jew. And so, I'm going to call him Josephus now.
Yeah. So clearly he didn't write what's in there now.
Yeah.
A Jew would never
But that doesn't mean he didn't reference Christianity. And one of the things, this is actually taken from a man named Louis Feldman. He's a Jewish, non-Christian, and apparently globally respected scholar on Josephus. Mm-hmm. And he says that Josephus's primary reference to Jesus is edited but not totally fabricated.
Everybody says that, but when you look at it in context of the chapter itself, it makes no sense in toto. Because look at the line. Look at what happens before that passage, and look what happens after that passage. The next passage, first you've got Pilate having a massacre in Jerusalem, and then the next line, then you've got this commercial for Jesus. Jesus is great. We love Jesus. And then the next line is, and this time there was another sad calamity.
Yeah, that's the thing, though.
Wait a second.
Josephus was a Jew. He probably wasn't Jesus's biggest fan, but like you said, yes, of course they run seamlessly together because there's two different stories, but any other story inserted there would also have run seamlessly together. So I feel like Jesus being I feel like that's not sufficient. I feel like Jesus could have been a dark, dark thing that was changed by Christians who didn't like what was in there. But I also feel like
the fact it's been tampered with at all is a hint and a half that we can't rely on it. But
Feldman makes
for 500 years, people are loving Josephus, and they never mention this passage, even though we depend on it like it's the only thing in the whole first century, and it is. Without that, nothing in the whole first century.
Feldman makes a really we have Paul, and we have all of the Gospels. We actually have quite a bit in the first century.
I talk about Paul, but as far as outside the cult, as far as outside Christianity, for corroborative evidence, we have nothing. If for the whole first century, if Josephus is taken out of the question.
Well, sure. We have other Christian cults and so on, but cult.
Here's the other thing. Here's the other thing too: is before Josephus. I mean, that was written in the '90s, the mid '90s. That's already a generation or two removed from the events of there, and we have plenty of people who were. Again, we have information on fake messiahs of that time. Why don't those same sources talk about Jesus? That's the thing that.
I'm sorry. Which sources? Could you name them again?
We've got Josephus himself talking about these ones. We've also got his sources like Tiberius of Tiberius. We've got Josephus's sources.
Do you mean Justice of Tiberius?
Sorry, Justice of Tiberius and Herod's court historian, so and so of Damascus, whose name is eluding me.
Okay. I just point out that Justice of Tiberius, none of his writings survive, and all we know.
Yes, that is correct, and we know that because in the 9th century, exactly mention that he makes no mention of him whatsoever.
But he doesn't say that Photius spent a lot of time talking about other Messiah candidates. So when you are listing examples of people who would have been interested in Messiah candidates or in things that are happening in this particular region and all this stuff, I think I'm reading Photius's things right now, and his thing is Jesus is an example. His complaint is that he omits a lot of what he considers to be big things. And I think that he kind of portrays, I think if you read the paragraph, which Tanner could post in the video, he kind of portrays this as a good overview that isn't very detailed. And I think that with that in mind, I
want to stop you. I hate to jump in, but I want to stop because he specifically says of Jesus, he makes no mention whatsoever because he was a Jew and those damn Jews, why don't they ever do that? He mentions.
Oh my gosh. He's such a racist, right? I was reading
this. Total racist. That's total racist. Yeah. But here's another thing. But I want to go back to the point of why do we have information about these much less interesting loser messiahs if Jesus did anything remotely like what happens in the Gospels?
I'm trying to remember. So far, you've given me Josephus as an example and Justice of Tiberius, who might or might not have mentioned any other messiahs at all. And I'd point out, I think Josephus did mention him, if not in the first reference, then certainly in the second. And I think Feldman's argument, and I'm going to tell you about it now. Feldman's argument for the first one being an edit and not a total fabrication is that he believes that when it talks about James, brother of Jesus, that the translation there after that is the aforementioned Christ, and then this is when the aforementioning was taking place. And I'm obviously, Hebrew or Greek fluent in that, but this guy is, and he says that the proper translation is the aforementioned Christ. And I think that
let's say that's true. Let's say it's not true, but let's say that was true. The story makes no sense if it's about James, the head of the Jerusalem church, who later church tradition said was the brother of the Lord, because it's talking about a Christian leader, a sect leader, who's so beloved by the Jews that when he gets killed unjustly by this mob, that that Jerusalem basically revolts, and they complain about it, and there's a whole hubbub. At the same time, when Christianity is supposed to be this hated, persecuted mob, everything about that story, and at the end of the story, it says who they're talking about. They're talking about Jesus, the son of Damnius. His brother becomes the high priest because that was his brother who was killed. So anyway, I go over that
my
in
first
huge
Josephus debate. I never claimed to know anything about this guy.
Yeah,
so
that particular one, the James reference, I just beat it to death in the book. So it's like, ugh, I don't even take it seriously anymore.
Yeah, I have read it, but yeah, I think Josephus is irrelevant. I just wanted to get to the bottom of how you felt about that. I'm gonna have to read.
You always say that. You always say Josephus is irrelevant. We've had this debate before.
It's because I think Josephus is irrelevant, but because I never bring him up because he's irrelevant, but because David is so.
It's fair cop. It's a fair cop.
I thought I would see his thoughts on the topic. Because
I have a better gotcha question for you. This one will take you out, Max. Here's what, as a Christian, do you think the miracles that happened in Jerusalem really happened? Like the mass resurrection of the saints, like the earthquakes, like, fill in the blank. I mean, you know them better than I do, probably. That's not true, but you know them just as well as I do. Do you think those really happened? And if so, how come no one noticed that? Let's take my favorite one. Let's take my favorite one, the mass resurrection, because that's the one that's like, come on, not even the other evangelists noticed that.
Well, yeah, it's only in Matthew. It's between two verses that, as you say, were derived from Mark. I have heard it argued well that the passage about the people running out in the streets are a scribal insertion. I don't know. I don't know whether it happened or not, and it doesn't really bother me in my faith either way.
If Matthew really wrote that, would you believe it that it happened?
If Matthew the disciple really wrote it?
Mm-hmm. Well, let's say, do you think Matthew the disciple wrote the book of Matthew?
No.
But if he had points for that, first of all, because so many Christians don't know that. But yeah, who do you think wrote these Gospels?
I don't know. Guys in the church.
Beautiful. Yeah, I agree. And it's so hard to get Christians to even admit to that uncertainty. But here's the thing I want to say is this is the problem with sources that I'm trying to underscore, is that even if this is a true story, even if Christianity is true, even if there is a Jesus, what is our sources to back that up with? And our sources are very problematic, even if Christianity is true.
Well, I would like to have here's how I feel about this is I'm not currently prepared, in my current situation, to have a prolonged debate about why I believe in Christianity and why I think you should. However, how long have we been doing this? Or rather, how much longer do we have? Yeah, I'm enjoying it. I don't want it to end.
Me too, actually. Yeah. Chris, how long have we got? It feels like we've been here a while.
Yeah, we've only been here about 47 minutes. It's only because you and I had this long pre-show watch Chris fuck up all the audio and video for that hour.
Which was fun.
Entertaining. Yeah, because the Skype says we've been here for an hour and 42 minutes.
Yeah, that's because we were yelling at the computer for a while. So.
And neither Max or I have had dinner yet, so it's like,
yeah, right. But here's how I feel about this. I feel that the debate on Jesus should be had at the man existed, religion or not religion level. I think that the evidence, I like you and I appreciate that you've taken the time to articulate your arguments, but I think the idea that there was no historical Jesus of any kind is very weak. And I think that there is more evidence that he did exist than that he did not. And I think that it's vague. I think that it's always going to be vague. I think that's the nature of history. But I also think that if you have to put your money on one, no matter who you are, I think the right answer should be putting it on Jesus, just because of what we have and what we know.
Hey, before you answer that, David, we are going to go take a quick commercial break again. And when we come back, you get to answer Max. See, I got to leave a little bit of a climax, man.
Hey, our advertisers are greedy because of all their
So, all right. So what we're going to do is take a quick commercial break. And what I want to advise the audience, if you're watching this, I'm jumping in and out of the chats. I'm trying to manage everything. It's really hard with only one computer screen. Maybe Johnny will buy me a new computer screen. If you guys go donate to Patreon, Atheist Analysis, throw another $10, $5, something like that. Then maybe we'll convince Johnny to buy me a second computer screen so I can interact with the chats and Max and them. But we're going to go take a quick commercial break. When we come back, make sure you guys are paying attention, because if you guys have questions, I will be fielding questions in probably about 15, 20 minutes. I'll let them go. We'll do some more questions if anybody has any questions they want to ask him. So make sure you guys stick around, because we'll be right back.
Recent Gallup polls show that the non-believer community is the fastest growing minority in the United States. But there's a culture rife with bias towards non-believers. We believe the best route to encouraging a humanistic worldview is to create more activists. You want the best tools for counting religion, so we'll be providing you with better content, as well as keeping you up to date on all that is happening in the atheist community. We aim to help everyone embrace their non-belief, while providing tools to encourage others through their journey. Grab a t-shirt, a bumper sticker, but most importantly, become a significant part of one of the fastest growing atheist communities with a support structure that forges skeptics and empowers humanism. So, what are you waiting for? Amaze yourself. Amaze the world. Become a patron today.
Here.
Okay, so I got it close. I was close. I just wasn't quite there. Okay, so thank you very much. Will you tell our audience a little bit about what you do, kind of what got you into activism, and where we can find you at?
All right. Well, my journey started when I was a wee mite of 17, and I was in college, and I had doubts about religion for a while, but then I started to really explore them, and I retreated into a hole, I joke, for about 6 months and came out an atheist at almost 18 years old. And up until that point, I'd been a deeply practicing, very devout, very believing Muslim woman, and I didn't really know what to do with myself or what to do with my life, really. And I came out publicly to my family, friends, community, everybody, and people had me convinced that I was crazy, I was wrong, I was alone. And so I went online and I looked up local atheist groups, and lo and behold, I found my student group, I found my local just general meetup group. And from there, I was able to go and really explore what was out there. And I realized that there weren't a lot of women involved in a lot of these groups, at least not on a leadership level. There weren't a lot of people of color. There were definitely not a lot of ex-Muslims, because most of us aren't out anyway. And for the sake of my family, I kept relatively quiet for a while. I just kept my activism on the volunteer and online level. But a couple of years ago, I saw a call on Skeptic for Writers, so I joined up there, blogged there for a couple of years, and that was a great experience. But I always sort of had a lot to say about issues of gender and Islam and all that, and race, for example. So I got my own blog at the Free Thought Blogs platform. And so I've been speaking and writing about Islam for about 3 or 4 years now. I have a book coming out just today. I got a hard publication date from my publisher, so that'll be out in December for the general public. A couple months before that for those lovely and patient people who backed me on Kickstarter. So yeah, that's mostly what I do, is activism within atheism about gender and Islam and sexuality. And I've also started reaching out to progressive Muslim groups to potentially do collaborative work with them to help encourage progress within the Muslim community.
Well, thank you so much, Hannah.
for joining us and sharing tonight. We really appreciate that.
My pleasure.
Up next.
Thank you guys so much for sticking around with us tonight. Again, tonight is a great night. We have no Johnny, but he's just working on other projects. We got Chris, we got Max, we got David. We've got a great time going on right now here tonight. So if you guys are watching this, prepare your questions, and I'll be taking questions out of the chat here in the next few minutes. We're also going to give them some closing time. I mean, I know Max is probably wanting to talk for at least a 10-minute block because he just can't shut up sometimes. So if you've ever seen any of our other shows, Max will interrupt me too. The best part is sometimes I'll be talking and Max will be like, hold on, I gotta make a point, and then he'll go on for 10 minutes, and it'll just be
not like
Dave.
Dave would never do that.
Y'all are lucky I'm tired today.
And so make sure if you guys have questions, make sure you hold them. I will post a note in the chat that says all questions, and then just flood me with questions, whatever floats your boat. I will ask them. I already have one queued up about
David,
Jesus' marriage. Hold on, Max.
Let Max ask the question. Yeah.
Hold on, Max. You can ask questions.
Okay.
So what I got to do too is I got to make sure we remind everybody that we have another show tomorrow night called Heretical Minds. That's our science show. They're going to be talking about GMOs. So if you believe GMOs are harmful, you should definitely watch this show. They're going to do the research, show the science, and give you a conclusion what they feel they come to. And then again on Sunday we have a special episode. We got Dan Finke from Camels with Hammers. He's going to join us to talk about NAMBLA apologetics.
Whoa.
And I'm not going to tell you guys exactly what that is because I think I'm going to coin the term copyright Christopher Tanner. Because, for fuck's sake, I've had some guy up my asshole about NAMBLA apologetics.
Whoa, that's
what
the last.
You paint quite a picture there, Chris.
Yeah.
Thanks, David. So you don't want to miss Sunday. We're also going to have a gentleman on that I can't mention his name because he is not out of the closet. He's going to talk to us about living in an extremely conservative area where he isn't even allowed to come out and what it would do to destroy him. He's going to offer some tips to some other people that are also in the closet, so you don't want to miss that. That's going to be a great episode this Sunday.
Are you going to electronically distort his voice? Because that's cool.
Yes, actually, I can do that. So
Sunday might actually be the first episode I watch of any of our shows. I'm pretty excited.
Are you in the closet too, Mr. Max? Are you?
No,
not yet.
No. I just think interesting things.
We got Max. Max has just openly admitted on Atheist Analysis that he is a closeted atheist. Everybody,
Dang it.
Max
was supposed to keep this
atheist.
quiet so they could talk on Sunday.
Oh, it was inevitable, Max. It was inevitable.
So,
but
all right. So I'm gonna go ahead and let the two go back at it. Go ahead and David, you could take off for Max.
Well, no, Max had a question. I wanted to hear it.
I do have a small question. Now, again, I keep bringing this up because I never get to bring it up because I don't know much about it, and I feel like people want to go through the throat in these kinds of discussions. So this is the one place where I can do it, I feel like. Back to the Josephus discussion. Yeah. You said that it was Josephus, the son of Damnius.
No, Jesus, the son of Damnius.
So
Sorry,
funny. Yeah. What did I say?
You said Josephus, son of Damnius. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, Jesus is son of Damnius, and I'm reading over it, and in this, kind of little, slot of lines, there are actually three Jesuses. We have Jesus, who was called Christ, who might or might not be one of these other two. Jesus, son of Damnius, and Jesus, son of Gamaliel. And I feel like there's no.
Once you get to the Jesus, son of Gamaliel, we're clear off the map by that point.
Well, I don't know about that. It's only like this far. Of course, I'm doing this by finger widths. However, I do think the fact that it is specifying Jesus, son of X, Jesus, son of Y, I do think, while I can't say it for certain, I do think that there's some wiggle room for someone to say that Jesus, who was called Christ, is a different guy. I think that exists in the framework of what we're looking at here. I also think, okay, so new question. Assume that I'm wrong. Maybe it is clear. Yeah. A lot of people are saying, and by people I mean people who know more about this than I do, that it is almost, unanimously agreed upon by scholarship that this refers to the Jesus. Do you disagree?
Sorry, say that last part again, that it agrees with what?
According to Wikipedia. Go
on.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
This is almost totally unanimous among scholarship that this does actually refer to Jesus.
Yeah, and that's all bullshit because
Oh.
yeah, that may even be true. When Wikipedia is not my first go-to for these kind of things, but probably most biblical scholars would say yes, this is talking about Jesus because that's what they do. But when you read like Christians love to say, put it in context, read what this story is. What we know about how Jesus' brother James, who I would say James, the head of the Jerusalem church, how he died, it's a completely different story from how this guy, Jacob, the brother of Jesus, dies. There's no matchup at all whatsoever. That's one of the hints that we're talking about Jesus altogether.
Indeed a good hint. Although I don't know that there's any.
And again,
I don't know if there's a lot of reliable sources on the Christian legend of James's death, so I'm not so sure how I feel about that as a rebuttal. However, I think
here's the thing: if you read chapter 3 of my book Nailed, I go into great detail about that, and I think you will agree with me that we can't use that as a source for Jesus.
Yeah, like I said, Josephus is not my thing. I'm intending to learn more about it.
But he's about the only historical source that is even close enough to a reference to Jesus to take seriously. So that's why I spent a lot of time with him. But I agree with you. He's not.
Yeah. Well, I think Paul takes him out of the discussion, and I think
that Josephus talks about this person. That reference in Josephus is talking about a concrete person. We don't get that from Paul. We don't get anything.
I think that we do. I think we have. He was a brother. He was crucified, which is a very human-y thing to do.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that because he does say. But how does he know he was crucified? Paul says he was crucified according to Scripture and rose on the third day according to Scripture. Just the way he says.
The exact verse reference that I can look at that.
Yeah, 1 Corinthians 15 when he's introducing, I think it's 7 and 8 when he's reducing. He's giving the list of witnesses for the risen Lord. He's not talking about people who knew Jesus during his lifetime. He's talking about people who know Jesus exactly the same way he does, as a risen vision, as somebody who spoke to him through Scripture. He's constantly telling us that. Not just Paul, but everyone is saying they know this happened,
when
that
he
happened
says,
according to Scripture.
I'm looking at 1 Corinthians 15, and when he says that he was buried and raised on the third day, yes, in accordance with the Scriptures, you don't think that is describing a material human being. Like, setting aside, you said two things, and I want to address both of them.
Yeah.
The first is you said that Paul's references to Jesus aren't material, and the second thing you said is that Paul is deriving his knowledge of Jesus from Scriptures. To me, those are two things. So I'm going to
those aren't two different things. But go ahead.
Okay, why does the origin of Paul's knowledge indicate whether or not Paul is talking about a real person? Because this real person was buried, had a brother, was crucified, and rose again.
Brother, but he did crucified, was buried, and rose again. And how does he know all those three facts? Because they are according to Scripture.
And
the same way they know that Mithras killed the bull, they say Hercules did his 12 things, because it is written.
Whoa, that's not what. Hold on. It says he raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures. This is
according to the Scriptures. Kata grapha, according to the Scriptures.
In accordance with and according to are not the same thing.
In English, they're very different. In Greek, they are not. Kata grapha, according to the Scriptures.
Okay, so you're saying that the same words mean both of those things in Greek?
In English, they do. You can parse that out in English. In Greek, actually, it can mean the same thing there. There is an ambiguity there. But what I'm saying is, constantly when we ask and look in Paul for some concrete examples, we get this roundabout talk. We think, well, he did this according to the Scriptures. We know he did this according to the Scriptures.
So the foundation of your argument is that he's saying according to the Scriptures, but according to you, the Greek is actually vague and could also mean in accordance with the Scriptures, which would also fit into.
No, I'm saying the English is vague. I'm saying the English is vague.
Okay, so let's look at the Greek here with the stupid concordance that I just closed. All right. Okay, so the KJV says according to the Scriptures.
Exactly.
Kata graphe, as you say.
Yeah.
Just
like he says kata sarka, according to the flesh, or in the manner of the flesh. He uses
that. Or in
that
accordance with the flesh also works in that context.
But see, that makes no sense in that context. Anyway. But anyway.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is we constantly get weirdly elliptical references from Paul when he's talking about his Jesus.
Okay.
We also get him disagreeing with Jesus. We also get him disagreeing with the guys who are supposed to be Jesus' friends and family. And we never hear anything about those guys being his disciples. We never. You say the brethren of the Lord. That's
So who
as
do you
close
think he
as we
meant when he
get.
said to the 12?
That's as close as we get. The guy he's opposing and dismissing and saying, well, I don't know who they really were. You know, how can you say that if he thinks he's Jesus' brother?
He didn't say he didn't know who they were. He said it didn't matter. He said that
who
everyone
they really were made no difference to me. Huh? How do you talk about that if that's Jesus' follower?
Because he believed that best friend. He believed that all are equal. That's exactly what he said. Like, he doesn't just say it doesn't matter to me. He said it doesn't matter to me because.
And he says we did not give in to them for a moment. You don't talk about that if you're talking about Jesus' friend. But again, let's agree to disagree on that. We can agree to disagree on that.
Okay.
For me, that's a very hint and a half that we're talking that something's very wrong.
I also think we're looking at this passage, right? We're looking at this passage, and it's listing the people that Jesus appeared to. It doesn't say that that's where they got all of their knowledge about Jesus. It just says that he appeared.
Paul does tell us where he gets his knowledge.
He gets
it from no one
who
was
knowledge from Revelation.
From Revelation and from Scripture. Two things. Revelation and Scripture.
However, when he's listing people who he appeared to, he's not saying those guys didn't also know Jesus. He again lists one of them as his brother. Like, I feel like this is weak.
Well, here's the thing. When he's talking about, and why can't we have a sister wife like the brethren of the Lord? When he's talking about the 500 brethren, whenever he uses the word brothers to talking about every single Christian out there,
however,
nothing about a physical relationship to Jesus.
So if I was talking to everybody, say I talked to everybody, and I was like, hey, what's up, brother? How you doing? I said brother all the time to everybody. That was me. That was my thing. But then one time I was listing people. And I was like, you got Tanner, all right?
Where does he list in 1 Corinthians about the brother of the Lord there? He doesn't list that in the.
Just because he doesn't say it here doesn't mean he magically didn't.
He doesn't say it anywhere. That's what the whole point I'm trying to say. He never points to these guys and says, and they knew Jesus because they walked around with him and talked around. He never says Jesus walked around and talked around.
But he uses
never
the
says
brother
anything.
Of Christ, a brother of the Lord, as an identifier for James. It's different than the other Christians he's listing who are.
You know what's funny about that verse too is and I grant you that's the closest he gets to it.
But he does do it.
The Greek in that actually says, I didn't meet any other of the apostles. I only met James, the brother of the Lord. He's not even counting him as an apostle. That's very weird.
Well, he's not an apostle. I mean, he's not a disciple anyway.
Well, Paul never even uses the word disciple. He never even uses the word.
Of course not, because that would just again, we're going back to the fact that he needed political power in the church, and to him that came from inequality. And if he used words that excluded him, like disciple, rather than words that included him, like apostle, then that would be counter to his mission. And I think that's a fine explanation.
I have to say that's extremely convenient. But more to the fact, if you believe that your God set this all in advance, it's very weird that he has this two-tiered structure and has to reboot to get Paul in there in the first place. That's a very weird way, for God to do it. In my opinion.
I mean, I'm not unfortunately privy to all of the decisions that God makes.
But listen, you can tell that he does a fucked up job for a lot of things. I mean, no disrespect, but I mean, there are a lot of weird ass features of what's supposed to be his scripture, like the fact that all our gospels are ultimately based on one gospel.
Sure. This is
the most low frills and low rent Jesus, the most fallible human Jesus, and the story grows from there.
Here's what I don't want this.
We're copying that story.
I don't want to. Here's. I'm not like right now. I don't have my notes in front of me and so on. So I really don't want to be dragged away from the topic too terribly much. However,
you sound like
I would
Jonathan
like to
Mann.
keep talking with you, and I would like to have another conversation about these issues.
I gotta say, I've been loving this. Normally,
I think this has been
really tedious. This has probably been the best Christian.
Well, usually when I debate, I feel like I'm playing my cards really close to the chest and never let him see an opening and all this stuff. And that really hasn't been this at all. And I've very much enjoyed that. And the result is that I revealed some areas that I'm ignorant on, like Josephus. But I think that that's fine, and I think it's comfortable to be in a position where that's possible. And
again, I have no interest in getting gotcha questions and making you look like an idiot, because I know how easy it is to be an idiot in these debates. You and I both. Yeah. Well, and I have no desire for that. I mean, honestly, I don't even think this issue is an important one for atheists. I think Chris has given us a strange signal, and I'm not sure how to interpret that.
Where's the window where he's in?
He Max. Well, he said Max. He said we all look like idiots in this debate, and I just was pointing at Max.
Gotcha. Gotcha. From the camera, you look like you're pointing to the mic, saying, "Don't say that on the mic."
No, you can say almost anything on the show. So we had a Christian postulating NAMBLA, so you can.
Are you kidding me?
Nope.
That's the Christian who's doing this?
Oh yeah.
When? That's not acceptable to me at all. Can I talk to this man on a show?
Oh, what a terrible time for the sun to go out.
Anyway, so let's.
I had a lag and missed all that. Oh well, next time for sure.
Yeah, go ahead, David. I interrupt you.
Oh no, there was a time lag, so I missed like 20 seconds of that last bit there.
I was just bitching about a Christian that. Was
those Christians. I was just saying that. Usually, I don't even do this debate with Christians because I don't even think it's an important issue, even for atheists. I mean, the historicity issue. At the end of the day, you're not going to convince any Christians that their Lord and Savior, who they're on a personal first name basis with, didn't exist. And I'm not really trying to, but what I am trying to do is show you where I'm coming from, and you've done a really great job of letting me spout off where I'm coming from, and I appreciate that very much.
Well, yeah, I agree that it's not a very important topic. I think that very few people's overall worldview would be changed one way or the other by whatever the issue they land on, except for Christians, obviously. But I also think, discussing like this is fun, so even if it's pointless.
What we have not gotten into tonight, and it's something that it's kind of near and dear to my heart too, is the state of biblical studies, and in particular the state of Jesus studies, and what a cluster that has been over the last 80 years. And I know that because Christians have been complaining about it. And
have you read a book
that's something going to book in great detail.
It's by a Jew named Nahum M. Sarna. He wrote a bunch of books, and on his introduction to a book on Genesis, he railed against this topic, and he talked about the fact how we teach the Bible, like they are elementary school, Sunday school children. Yeah. But then when we're studying Greek classical literature, it's just so different when it's all really, studying old documents, and people don't have a prioritization of learning the historical context. They don't have a prioritization on learning all this stuff. And I think that's a huge problem.
It is a huge problem because there's so much that you get that realize, the Bible is coming from this that you don't get if you don't study Greek or you don't study the class.
I've been studying the Old Testament for a really long time, but even right at the beginning, within a few weeks of years and years ago when I decided to really get in the Old Testament, I'd already outpaced most of the people around me in knowledge on the subject because it's just not a thing that people Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I've got a friend of mine from Australia named Andrea Gerritsen who does really deep Old Testament studies from a linguistic standpoint, just not even getting into theology so much as just saying, what do these words really say and how are we translating them and interpreting them? And she blows my mind with the stuff that she just comes off.
The Old Testament is legitimately interesting. I'll send you some of the stuff that I wrote for your thoughts. But it's
I would love that.
We read the New Testament, and it's like this Greco-Roman proto-Western. We jive with that. It's how they think, how we think.
Yeah.
The Hebrews did not.
It's a whole different Dungeons and Dragons thing going on in the Old Testament.
And it's not just a few hundred years of difference. It's a huge cultural change,
Absolutely.
And that's why I enjoy studying it, is because it forces me to think about things in a different way. And I've kind of reached the conclusion that Western society has become very, and I think this is good because it's why we've made so many scientific advancements. We've become very literally, logically minded. And I think that's fantastic. It makes for great mathematicians and great scientists. It's why we are where we are. But I also think, I think that's a very Greco-Roman, proto-Western way of thinking. I think they kind of put us on this line. And I think that this way of thinking has made us extremely bad at interpreting things like the Old Testament. And I think that's why you have so many people clinging to young earth creationism and all these views, is because they are trying to fit, the Genesis account of creation into their Western, literally minded viewpoint. And I don't think that is an appropriate way to study that scripture.
It's like I'm looking in a mirror.
I know. Soon Max is going to be an atheist. Anyway, so what we want to do, I do have some questions. I have some questions and answers for you guys. But what I thought before we get into the question and answers, because they're going to be fun ones, is I figured, hey, what's better than having you guys just kind of throw a 5-minute closer or a 1-minute closer, whatever floats your boat, and, you know, kind of close out what you want our audience to see. So I know I'm really small in the picture and everybody's got to squint to see my tiny little face, but what we want to do is let's throw a little bit of closer, because there are going to be people that are going to go, hey, you know, what happened tonight? You know, what can I take away from this? We have to be at least a tiny bit serious, given, you know, the topic.
Sure.
So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to let Max, if you want to go ahead and go first, you can close. And as soon as Max done, go ahead, David, and you can jump right into it.
Okay. I'm sorry, just so we're clear. After the closers, are we doing Q&A or are we done?
Nope, we'll
okay,
do a
cool.
Q&A. I've got about 7 questions queued up.
You want to know
right
a
now.
secret, Christopher Tanner? Now that I no longer run a show, really?
Sure.
When I used to do Q&As on debates, 70% of them were me. Like,
what?
Yeah. I just make up my own questions.
Well, you know what's sad is Q&A is where the debates really happen. In most debates, it's just blah, 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 back and forth. And, you know, this has been a happy exception to that.
Like, go back and watch the debate with Rachel Slick and Venom Fang X. All of those questions were from me. Like,
is that Matt Slick's daughter, Rachel?
Yeah.
It is.
Oh,
yeah. She was.
Matt Slick is the biggest tool bag in the universe. Oh, what an asshole he is.
I don't really know him. But.
Oh. I met him once, and it was like, really, dude? You are kidding. Anyway, don't get me started on Matt Slick. Anyway.
Yeah. So anyways, my point of view is this. I think people are going to watch this, and what they're going to see is that in this world, you know, there's a lot of different viewpoints and blah, 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 blah. But I'm right. But I do think that the evidence is there. I think that what happens is, and this is not me trying to offend you, David, is I think you end up in these situations where people are like, well, this never happens except this. You know, Paul never gives a clear definition of Jesus as a real figure, except for this time and that time. But those didn't count, and here's why. Or you end up with, you know, there's no first century records, except for, you know, Paul and you know, X and Y, the Gospel of Thomas, you know, all these different things. But those don't count, you know, and I feel like the reality of it is these things exist. Christianity existed, and like these things came from somewhere. And obviously you can either believe that it is what I say that it is, which is Jesus, or you can read David's upcoming book. I just thought I'd plug you real fast. But I do think that the evidence is there, and I think it's obvious that Jesus was a real person. Like, in fact, in previous conversations with Christopher Tanner, I compared it to Holocaust denial. Which
don't get me started. No, go ahead.
I do. Yeah. And I think that it's incorrect. That's all. And I think that I've explained why. I don't really have anything to add.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing, and honestly, I gotta say again, I really enjoyed this. It's been a great conversation. You'll be happy to know that there are plenty of atheists out there who feel exactly the way you do, that the evidence is there and it's on the Jesus side. And believe me, it gives me no pleasure to be a pariah in these circles and to be spouting what most people think is weird crackpottery. I don't like, you know, Holocaust denial. Moon landing was not fake. Climate change denial drives me up the fucking wall. All these things. And yet, the only reason I embrace Jesus myth theory is not because I accept all Jesus myth theories or I'm out to get Jesus because Christianity is bad and I want to destroy it from within. It's because I think that there's so many problems with the official story of Christianity that are only answered if we look at it from the standpoint that this was a creation of the first century, a literary creation. And again, not to beat a dead horse, I go into great lengths of that in the new book. And with push comes to shove, if I'm wrong about that, I would be delighted to find out that. And because I don't like being wrong, I like to be right. And this is what this is where the evidence is leading me. So that's it. Let's do Q&A.
That means, hey, Chris, unmute your microphone, stupid. That's what you're supposed to say. So, all right, so let's pull up the Q&A here. So the first question is to Max.
Yep.
When are you going to get your hair cut?
I just did, and when the haircutter did it, like, she like cut it like close on the sides, like long on top, and when she was done, I looked in the mirror and it was flawless. But then I came home, and now I can't make it look like anything but a poof ball. So
that was my question, Max.
Yeah,
So
I'm not really sure.
The follow-up question, just so you know, Max.
Yeah.
You want to know the follow-up question?
I do. Yeah.
Okay, so the follow-up question is, do you use men's hair products? And if you do, please recommend them.
Okay, well, I have used the exact same shampoo my entire life, which is Head and Shoulders. I found out a few years ago that it's a dandruff shampoo, so I have no idea if I have dandruff or not, because I've never not used a dandruff shampoo. And I
concur with my colleague.
For all I know, I have terrible dandruff, but I have no idea, and I've never known. So.
Well, you look fabulous, Max.
Thank you. Actually, lately I've been using the Old Spice scented because I know that this is a little bit, at this point it's become overused, the Old Spice Swagger body wash, but it's just so good, and it's the best one they ever came out with. And so I really wanted I wanted my hair to work with my body, so I use the Old Spice scented Head and Shoulders now. And the Swagger deodorant.
Now, maybe if you got a camera that sat still and didn't move every time you laid down.
Hey, whoa, I said that I
your
couldn't
body.
do this. I was like, well, Christopher, like, I'm not in a position where I can really have a good setup, and you were like, well, do it anyway.
Yeah,
I
did, actually.
I don't complain.
I did.
Then during Q&A, the show took a very different turn.
So, all right, so we'll go on to the next question. Thank you, Max, for your manly man tips. So, the next question is to David. And this is from a gentleman.
I, too, use Head and Shoulders. Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
So the next question is kind of like a two-parter. The first part is, are you aware of any mythicists that teach at accredited universities? A. And B, the second question is what is your opinion of Bart Ehrman? Because if you're as opinionated as Richard Carrier, you'll have a great opinion. So
right. I'm going to start with the second question first because I think it's a better question. I am a huge fan of Bart Ehrman. I think he's done more than most secular biblical scholars to show, kind of draw the curtain back on what a mess biblical studies has been and continues to be. His latest book, I should say his penultimate book, Forgery and Counter-Forgery, blows me away. The amount of work that went into that is just astounding to me. He's best known for being such a staunch historicist. And yeah, he and Richard Carrier have been going at loggerheads, right for ages now, for years now. And I think it's too bad because it sort of distorts the issue. I wish that he would respond to the meat of the arguments, the criticism that Rick is bringing up to him, and not worry so much about, Rick is being mean to me. It seems very disingenuous to me that he's been avoiding responding to any kind of criticism, when there's such valid criticism be brought up. I mean, we didn't dislike his book, Did Jesus Exist?, because we expected him to agree with us. We didn't like it because we were expecting the best defense of historicity, and instead we got a book phoned in so badly that we were talking to each other thinking, did he even write this, or did he just, pass it off to a grad student or something? It's just not well written. It's got errors that he normally doesn't make. It's not up to his high standards. And in his most recent book, From Jesus to God, I believe it's called, he's actually sounding a lot more like what we've been saying, mythicists like myself. And I'm counting that as serious mythicists like Robert Price, like Richard Carrier, that crowd. Incidentally, both of those guys have relevant PhDs in the field. I often get the question of, which of the mythicists out there, teach at an accredited university? Usually the question's phrased in such a way that they are excluding. It's like, have you stopped beating your wife? They say, they do everything to wrap it around as that these guys are on the fringe somehow because they're not real qualified to be talking about it. I'm certainly not. I don't have a relevant PhD in the field. I am just a guy, and that's why I cite everybody in the book when I'm talking about things. In Nailed, I do that, and I do it even 10 times more in the new book because I got such crap for saying things without citations in there. But these the whole side issue, this song and dance of, well, this is a fringe thing. It's always going to be a fringe thing. As long as there is such a thing as biblical studies, anything that questions the whole grounding of Christianity is going to be a radical fringe idea. And not all radical fringe ideas are created equal.
Cool. Next question's for Max. The person in the chat has asked, can you name another historical figure for which we have such limited evidence, such as like no archaeological evidence or no primary sources?
Well, I mean, I go back to the fact that I think including things like, Pontius Pilate, for an example, his inscriptions is a little misleading. I think the idea that a guy like Jesus would have had inscriptions like that, I think it's unfair to compare those two. I think what the comparison should be on is written records, because I think that those are really the things that it makes sense for historical Jesus to have had. Like, there's no reason they would have, does that make sense? And so I think that if you compare just on the basis of written records, I think you have, a bunch. I have a tab.
Hey, Max, which are we talking about, the gospel, or are we talking about other written records?
I'm talking about Paul, every biblical and extra biblical, like the number of times Jesus is mentioned. I think that if you look at the references to Jesus, we have a buffet of, admittedly sometimes different views, but more written records than you have for people who were more prominent in his era and in his location. And I think that for that reason, I think that it's justified to say that Jesus existed, unless you want to say that written records themselves are totally weak and that we need something like inscriptions in order to bring it home, which I think is fine. But I also think that if we say, Pontius Pilate existed, we know that because of inscriptions, and only bred, 2 side references within, 40 or 60 years, like, I think that if that can happen, the idea that, this, Jewish, Messiah candidate hippie would have so many, I think that is surprising. And that's my answer. Oh, also, one more thing. I just learned through a chat from a friend that if you don't have shampoo and conditioner as one bottle, but have separate conditioner, that it actually reduces the poofiness. So I just wanted to make sure that was known, because in case anyone else is struggling with what I've been struggling with, it turns out that when you combine them, you lose some of the,
So the next question, Max, the next question for you is, are you wearing pants?
Max gets all the good questions.
David, we know you're not wearing pants.
It's actually a good question. Because it has been my first debate in so long, and if I dragged my brother in from playing Morrowind, he would verify this. I actually was shouting about how I should probably put some clothes on after this Skype call had already started, and I'd muted myself, but before the show had started. So I'm happy to say that I do have a shirt from Germany that says German things, and some random shorts that I have otherwise almost not worn at all because they're gray, which is ugly. And they have some red, though. It's just some matching. Yeah. It's a good question, though. Although
Very good question.
Yeah.
Sexiest debate ever.
So the next question for David was, do you, and I know this is a little off topic of the Jesus thing, and
I am wearing pants, yes.
You are wearing, are you sure?
No, it's a kilt. I never wear pants.
I was just saying, and you don't wear underwear either, so...
David Fitzgerald doesn't actually believe in the historicity of pants, so...
That's right.
All right, so, in all seriousness, so I've heard this posed...
There's a reading book, Sewn. 10 myths about pants.
Oh, Max. Anyway, so there's somebody sent me an email, posed a question about Genesis, and you seem to think that most of the Gospels were written by one or only 2 individuals. Do you believe the Old Testament is written in the same way?
No, I actually think.
Hey, you're not David. I asked David that question.
You got the pants question.
You can rebut that question after David answers if you really want to.
I'm sure that you will agree with me.
I'm sure you would. It sounded like you were going right along what I would have said, which is that there are loads of different authors for the Old Testament.
Well, awesome, Max.
Yeah.
My answer is that there's actually the way that they think that it came together was that there were 4 different authors, and you can read Who Wrote the Bible by Friedman for a little bit more in-depth detail, but that they came from different eras of Judaism and different perspectives. Like you have
the priestly Deuteronomist.
Yeah. And E and J, came from different sides of Israel after the split between Israel and Judah. And the northern side, and I forget which one was the northern side, had priests that claimed descendancy from Moses. And the southern side had priests that claimed descendancy from Aaron, as one example. And if you keep that in mind, you can find the passages that are attributed to both, like say a bunch of negative or positive things about the one they consider to be their respective ancestor in the text. And I feel like it adds a lot more depth to what you are reading when you understand the context in which it was written. And so it upsets me that this scholarship is shunned because I don't think that it contradicts Christianity overly much or at all.
Everything that Max just said, pretend I said it except for the last part, which I totally disagree with that last line. Other than that, I totally 100% agree with him.
Cool.
All right, so Max, this is a 2-part question for you, and we're almost done, I promise, and then we'll wrap it up. But the next question I have is a 2-parter. Part A, Max, can you name who this quote is from? And then B, tell us your opinion about it. All right, you ready?
Yeah.
I don't do Bible studies with atheists.
My nemesis.
Do tell.
Yeah.
Side 10 Bruggencase.
Oh, I hate him so much.
He gets on my nerves so much because he walks around and people listen to him and elevate him. It's like, oh, this is Christianity, and that guy is just a jerk. My problem is, there's a lot of people who hold his opinions who are pretty cool people. There was a guy named Aaron, who was on this show, Aaron Furlong, and he holds a lot of the same opinions, but he's a nice guy. My problem is not that Side 10 has bad opinions, although he does have really bad opinions. My problem is that he is literally, actually, physically, let me just, this is not a metaphor. He is an anus.
Max, I have never loved you more than this very moment.
All right, next question for David is, are there any characters in the Bible that you do believe existed?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's plenty. In fact, there's plenty in the New Testament that I think existed. For instance, Paul's the prime example. The problem with Paul is that half of what we know about Paul and almost everything we like about Paul comes from stuff made up by Luke, which isn't true. In fact, at every point where Luke and Paul overlap, there's a disagreement between them.
Have you read The First Paul by Marcus Borg?
I have not.
Borg? You should. Borg. He recently passed away, unfortunately. But in The First Paul, he talks about the discrepancies and the harmonizations and things that seem more or less likely to be true in Acts compared to Paul's epistles. And anyways, the point I was going to make is that I think that what you're saying is kind of a simplification more than I would say that it's incorrect. I think you should read it. It's really good.
I think I would. I mean, that's Jesus Seminars Borg, I'm assuming, right?
Well, he's I don't know, because he's a Christian, but a lot of people aren't so confident on him being a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people condemned him for his he didn't believe Jesus was physically resurrected. He had a lot of strange beliefs that don't really fit within the Christian mold. However,
ooh, that's a question for you. Do you have beliefs that don't fit in the Christian mold? Not to put you on the spot, but you seem fascinated enough to have a lot of that.
I do, and we could talk for hours about that. However, I think I've never read anyone who knows Paul like Mark knows, or like Marcus Borg knows Paul, and I think, and I think it's just really good.
Very cool.
Read it.
Cool.
Yeah, that's all.
That said, I think most of the Old Testament figures are mythical, except for like Hezekiah and some of the lesser known kings like that. And the characters in the New Testament that we show up in Paul's letters, they were associates of his. They were the leaders of the Jerusalem church. I think the gospel writers took those names from Paul's letters and made them characters in the book. That's what I think.
Huh.
And well, for instance, that's why our gospels were all anonymous, but that's why they have those names that they have now today. is because they were taken from those names. And there was kind of an arms race to get the right names.
Oh, cool. All right, so I got the last question. Then we're going to wrap up. We got a T-shirt giveaway, an intro for the next show, and then I've got a special surprise for Max because he's never seen this before.
Okay.
But the last question is for David, and it is, why would anyone make up a leader like Jesus and then make up his execution at the hands of the Romans?
Great question. It's because Jesus started as a mystery faith deity, and that was the way this particular allegory went. It didn't have to be that way. There were other Jewish sects that had different ideas of who the Messiah was going to be and what kind of Messiah it was going to be. But the one that won out was the one that said, oh, this is why the Romans keep kicking our ass. It's not because there wasn't a Messiah. It's because he was a spiritual Messiah. And that they're getting their ass kicked by the Romans is what prompted Mark, the guy we call Mark, to write his gospel, in my humble opinion.
All right, and I'm going to lie. I got one more question.
I can't stay mad at you, Chris.
I know you can't. I'm so damn sexy. So, the last question is, did Jesus have a wife?
I think that's for Max.
Is that for me?
Sure.
I mean, I think that's stupid. I mean, so we just spent this entire debate arguing back and forth. Sorry, was that too blunt?
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry. Like, two things. The first is we just spent this entire debate arguing back and forth over, like, a few references to his brother and a handful of documents, and, like, you're gonna tell me that we actually also have evidence that he had a wife. Like, what? Like, come on. You know, that's dumb. Like, you can't just...
It is dumb.
Like...
It is.
Oh. But also...
Go ahead.
Looking at other religions in the world, I don't know if there is anything that I am more grateful for than that we don't have descendants of our founder to bicker.
That would be annoying. The Mormons do. The Mormons
It seems
do.
like
It's
a
very
good
annoying.
decision. It seems like a decision that happened. It seems to me that if Jesus had children, I mean, that would have been a big deal. That would have been an intrinsic part of the theology. You know, like, my understanding is that successorship is how the whole Sunni Shiite thing happened. Like,
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Like, that would be a mess. Like, I'm really glad that didn't happen. And I pointed this out. Oh, man, this is one of the books I want to recommend you, was pointing out that although it is really uncommon for a Jewish rabbi to be unmarried, it is very common for a Jewish rabbi to wait until their late 30s, early 40s to have been married because they were traveling about and it was tougher to have a wife. And this book, I wish I could just read a chapter of a book, but I can't. So instead, I'm going to give Chris Tanner the name of this book, and he can write it in the
magic box. Yes.
Yeah. It's called, New Light on the Difficult Words of Jesus. And the reason why I like this book is because, like me, the author of this book, who does it much better because I am a layman, talks about Jesus in his historical Jewish Old Testament context. And he talks about and justifies, using Talmudic quotes and so on, this idea that it was common for Jews to wait until they were older to get married. Yeah, because if you're traveling around and it's dirty, you know, and bringing a pregnant woman along, like, you know, you're pregnant, like, that's tough, I'd imagine. I've never been pregnant, but a friend of mine named Holly has ranted to me extensively about the pain of pregnancy, even though she's also never been pregnant. She has heard tales.
I want to dovetail on that question real fast, just briefly. Yeah, I totally agree with him, of course. But one thing to point out is the recent fragment that seemed to point to Jesus having a wife has been shown to be a complete forgery, all in all. So it's not even. They weren't even saying this in the second or third or first century. Whatever
you're talking about
was
that
meant to
little
be.
piece of paper.
Exactly.
Oh, that was...
It's been completely bogified. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, I didn't know that we were talking
about. It's debunked. Yeah, it's
so
debunked.
True.
Yeah.
I mean, David probably doubts that paper exists at all, so of course he would say that. But
we have good empirical evidence for that.
Oh, I'm sure. That's what they all say. That's what they said about Jesus.
No, they didn't. That's the point. That's the point, Jesus. Max.
Okay, fine. But still.
All right, guys. Thank you guys so much for coming on. It was wonderful having both of you on our show. David, you also join us back again. We'll have to do a segment on the Mormons. I have a friend I want to introduce you on, and we've only done one show on Mormons. That was way way back in October. So
that is just a cornucopia of fun.
Yeah. So we'll have to have you back on. We have a friend of the show that has worked with us that is very, very heavily indoctrinated as a Mormon, has left it, now is an atheist, yada yada yada. So anyway, so I promised everybody if you shared our event, that was the big thing. Share our event. We're gonna give some fucking t-shirts away. So if I could play the song, and I will have this song hopefully within a week. You know that song where it goes shot, 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 shot? Yes. I'm going to make it, and I'm going to have Max do a voiceover where he goes shirt, 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 and maybe we'll get a little picture of him dancing around in a shirt or something like that. And anyway, so we're gonna throw all that together. But I do got to give some shirts away tonight. I got to give some shirts away because that's what I promised. I promised I would do that, so I have to make sure I am good on the promises. And so everybody knows what I did is I sent random messages to people to say, hey, give me a number. Give me a number. And I went through the list of people. And if you're on the guest list, and I could show you, you know, based on my phone right here, this is what the guest list is. And so based on the guest list, throughout all the different numbers that I was given, I got to randomly pick a couple of people. And David, I'm sorry I can't pick you because you're on the show tonight. But I'll tell you what, if you really would like to wear an Atheist Analysis shirt next convention you do, just send me an email and I'll send you a complimentary Atheist Analysis shirt. That way you can, you know, say, hey, I was on these dumbasses show one time.
Excellent.
So the first person that we have tonight is Wesley Bonite.
I know that dude. I love that dude.
All right. Well, he posted in here. He joined the group. He shared our event. So Wesley, you win a free t-shirt. Make sure you contact Christopher Tanner at atheistanalysis.com, and I will make sure to get your t-shirt size, and we can kind of go through your different options.
Wesley, you're a sexy man beast, and you know it.
Oh my gosh. I can close all these tabs now that we're done.
Yes. The next person that receives a t-shirt tonight, drumroll, Kimberly Danner. So if you're watching this again, make sure you send me a message. You were the other number that was picked tonight. I got a couple of different t-shirt options. I want to thank Reasonist Products. Reasonist Products has donated one t-shirt tonight for the cause. If you don't know who Reasonist Products is, make sure you go to their website, reasonistproducts.com. You can pick up all of the different t-shirts they have. They're very cheap, very affordable, and awesome. And
I got to stop you, Chris. Because I totally know Kimberly Danner, too. Also awesome.
David, you know, yeah. Maybe these are all friends off David's list. Jesus Christ.
It was inevitable.
Anyway, so thank you, David, for promoting the show tonight and getting a bunch of your fans to come join and watch you debate Max. So as we close, there's two things I want to do. I want to make sure we remind everybody, if you like what we do, like us on Facebook, like us on YouTube, throw us a comment. If there's something that pissed you off, throw a comment in, not in the chat, but throw a comment afterwards. Make sure you tell us what it is you don't like. Our goal is to change, to perfect the show, to make it as best as we can. And, you know, we know next week we'll bring Johnny back on to make sure we kind of bring some of that balance to the scene here. So, you know, so we have the t-shirts we gave away. We had a great show. On Thursday, we have Heretical Minds with GMOs. Sunday, we have a great show with a closeted atheist and Dan Finke talking about NAMBLA. We also have Monday, Prophet Cast. You don't want to miss Prophet Cast. They always talk about current events. Last week was a tearjerker. I cried myself to sleep. You don't want to miss it. So thank you to all our sponsors. Thank you to those that are watching. We like to end the show with what I call the steal from the Daily Show. And they used to do this thing called a moment in Zen. Well, I now call this a moment in Christian epiphany.
Sakes. Brothers and sisters, please pay attention to the information in this video.
And I command Crystal to be made whole. Get on the Kosha, cleanse the blood.
Couldn't even believe it. I can't even believe it. How did we get this way?
How dare you? Who the hell do you think you are?
This guy
comes to my house, he's a Satanist, but one of the Satanist churches here where they sacrifice babies.
It is mind-blowing, eye-opening, bone-shaking, branch-breaking, soul-gripping. And I hope that it wakes you up.
And melt those babies into candles, their skin, and that's supposed to give them more demonic power.
I'm not trying to be some smooth little pretty boy, sissified preacher up here. I'm going to get up and preach God's word, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and you know, you can put it in your pipe and smoke it.
Who do you think you are? You don't have to stay down. God will get you up now. You don't have to stay sick. God will heal you, and He want to do it for you right now. But you got to move out by faith. You must order the personal prayer package right now. You must order the personal prayer package right now.
Atheist Analysis is a secular activism show developed by Secular Syndicate. Find us on the web, atheistanalysis.com, secularsyndicate.io. Special thanks to Max Mills, Steve Hayes, David Curry, Joseph Casper, Esta Amera, Steve Tillman, Joey Lee Kirkman, Mark Shannon Nebo, Jeff Arosa, Elisa Gates, Sarah Moorhead, JT Eberhardt, Cody, David, Mathis, Jessica, Alyssa, Joel, Chris, Jonathan, Skylar, Zachary, Stefan, Dylan, Tanya, Bryce, Ethan, Jordan, Tanya, Bryce, again, Caitlin, Frank, John, Jim, Adam, James, Patrick, Lee, Tyrone, Justice, Mike, Larry, Jessica, Rob, Scott, Alice, Rob Burrows, his wife as well. We also want to thank all our Patreon sponsors. I can't read them because it's way too fast. Become a Patreon today, patreon.com/atheist analysis.